At 13, I was thrown out like trash by my own parents, but 15 years later, they came crawling back expecting a fortune, only to discover I had become the one person who could shut them down for good. My name is Amara Hayes. I'm 28 years old, and 15 years ago, my mother and father decided I was no longer their problem. They put my belongings in garbage bags, set them on the porch, and told me to wait for my uncle. Last week, they showed up to the reading of my Uncle Walter's will, the man who had raised me for the past 15 years, with confident smiles and a high-priced attorney, fully convinced they'd be walking away with millions. But when the estate lawyer, Miss Patricia Nolan, opened the sealed envelope and began to speak, those smiles evaporated. And when she reached the seventh clause, my mother, the same woman who had once declared I was no longer her daughter, bolted to her feet, her face drained of color, her mouth hanging open in shock. Before I get to the moment that changed everything. If you appreciate stories of justice and setting firm boundaries with family, please take a second to like and subscribe, but only if this resonates with you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Drop a comment and let me know. To understand why my mother reacted the way she did, I need to take you back to the summer of 2010, when I was a 13-year-old girl who believed she was the cause of every problem in her household. Growing up in a modest house on the outskirts of Portland, I learned early on that love in our family was not distributed equally. My father, Daniel Hayes, worked long hours as a mechanic at a local garage. He was a quiet man, and most of his words were simple agreements with whatever my mother said. My mother, Cheryl, worked the register at a grocery store and managed our household with the precision of someone who knew exactly who was worthy and who wasn't. My sister, Melissa, was 2 years older than me. She had our mother's golden hair and bright eyes, and everyone, including Mom, adored her. Melissa looks just like you did at her age, people would say, and Mom would beam with pride. I, on the other hand, took after Dad's side of the family, brown hair, brown eyes, a quiet nature. Mom never said it was a bad thing, but she also never had much to say about me at all. The favoritism was obvious. For Melissa's 15th birthday, Mom threw a huge party with a custom cake and a karaoke machine. For my 13th, 3 months later, we had a simple dinner at the kitchen table with a discount cake from the store where Mom worked. The frosting just said happy birthday, a generic leftover from someone else's canceled order. I didn't fully understand what was happening until I was 12. That's when I discovered that Melissa had a college savings account that had been set up when she was 5. Years of deposits had built it into a sizable sum. When I asked Mom if I had one, she looked at me as if I'd asked a foolish question. Melissa needs that money for her future, she said. You'll figure something out. You're resourceful. That was the first time I clearly understood my place in the family. I was the extra child, tolerated but never truly valued. The summer of 2010 changed everything. In April of that year, I applied for the Oregon STEM Summer Academy at Oregon State University. It was a residential program for promising students in science and math, and the scholarship covered everything. I didn't tell anyone in my family that I had applied. I had learned not to share my hopes in that house. On May 15th, my acceptance letter arrived. Out of over 2,000 applicants, I was one of the 50 students selected. For exactly one afternoon, I felt like I mattered. But then Melissa found out about a performing arts camp in California. It was expensive, and there was no scholarship. That night, Mom announced the solution she had reached. Amara, you'll decline that science program. We can't afford both, and Melissa's camp will help her college applications. She spoke as if she were discussing the weather, not destroying my dreams. I stared at my plate, and before I could stop myself, I said, no. The room went silent. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. Excuse me? Mom's voice dropped to a sharp, dangerous register. This scholarship is mine, I said, my voice shaking but clear. I earned it. Mom looked at me like I had transformed into a stranger. If you can't sacrifice for this family, she said slowly, then you're not part of this family. At 13, I thought she was just angry. But 3 days later, I came home from the library to find my belongings packed into garbage bags on the front porch. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking resolved. "I called Walter," she said. "He's coming to get you. From now on, you're his problem." I stood there on the porch, trying to process what was happening. Behind Mom, I could see my father in the hallway. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word. I looked up at the second-floor window and saw Melissa watching from behind the curtain. When our eyes met, she stepped back into the shadows. She never came down. I waited on that porch from 6 in the evening until 10 at night, 4 hours. My mother went back inside after 5 minutes, and the porch light never came on. Uncle Walter lived in Seattle, 3 hours away. He drove through the night to get to me. When his gray car pulled into the driveway, I was still sitting on those garbage bags, my knees pulled to my chest. He got out slowly, walked toward me, and wrapped me in a hug so tight I could hardly breathe. "From now on," he said quietly, "you have a home." That night, as we drove north through the darkness, I didn't know that my mother had signed a document before Walter left. I didn't know what it meant. I was just a scared kid staring out the window, wondering what I had done wrong. It would take 15 years for that document to resurface, and when it did, it would change everything. Uncle Walter's home in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood wasn't grand, but to me, it felt enormous. For the first time in my life, I had a room that was entirely mine. More importantly, I had someone who believed in me. Walter had built a real estate company from scratch, starting with a single small office building he'd bought after years of working double shifts. By 2010, he owned 8 properties across the Seattle area. He never married or had children, but when I arrived with nothing but 2 garbage bags, he didn't just take me in, he invested in me. Over the next 4 years, I dedicated myself to my studies. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, president of the math club, with a perfect GPA. I was offered admission to the University of Washington's Business School, and by 2018, I had graduated with honors. Uncle Walter gave me internships at his company where I learned the business from the ground up. In 2019, I earned my CPA certification. A year later, Walter offered me a position as controller. By 2021, I was chief financial officer, managing a portfolio of 12 commercial properties worth millions. On my 26th birthday, Walter sent me an email with the subject line to my daughter. It read, "You don't need to prove anything to the people who abandoned you, but you do need to prove to yourself that you are worthy." Happy birthday, Amara. In 15 years, my biological family reached out exactly 3 times. The first was in 2012 when my mother called Walter to ask for money. "Times were hard," she said. Surely he could help his own brother. Walter declined. The second was in 2016 when Melissa sent a wedding invitation, no personal note. Just a formal card. I didn't attend. The third was in 2020 when my mother sent an email suggesting we catch up. I deleted it without responding. I wasn't holding a grudge, I had simply built a life that didn't include them. In the summer of 2024, Walter received a devastating diagnosis, congestive heart failure, advanced stage. He lasted only 8 months. During those final months, he updated his will, but when I asked about it, he just smiled. "Everything's taken care of," he said. "I've handled the rest." Uncle Walter passed away peacefully on February 28, 2025, with me holding his hand. 1 week later, my phone buzzed with an unknown Portland number. I almost didn't answer. Amara, the voice was instantly recognizable. "Sandra," I said, using her name, not Mom. There was a pause. "I heard about Walter," she said. "I should come up for the memorial service." The memorial had been 3 days earlier. Then came the real reason for the call. I also heard there's a will reading coming up. Family has a right to attend. I knew then that they were after the money. The next morning, I confirmed that they had hired an attorney to challenge the will, alleging that I had manipulated a sick man in his final months. They were demanding to attend the reading. Miss Nolan's office occupied the top floor of a skyscraper in downtown Seattle. On March 10th, she laid out the situation. They're arguing that you isolated Walter from his family and pressured him to change his estate plan. They're demanding half of everything. I read through the filing, my stomach churning. If this goes to litigation, Miss Nolan continued, the estate could be frozen for up to 18 months. They're betting you'll pay them off to make them go away. Do you have any documentation about your circumstances in 2010? Ms. Nolan asked. I thought back to that night on the porch, the garbage bags, the 4-hour wait. I was 13, I said. I didn't exactly keep records. But Walter did. She made a call to her assistant, and 20 minutes later, a yellowed folder arrived. Amara, did you know about this? She slid the document across the desk. The header read, Voluntary Relinquishment of Parental Rights and Transfer of Guardianship. It stated that Daniel and Cheryl Hayes had legally surrendered all parental rights over me and transferred full guardianship to Walter. At the bottom were 4 signatures, my mother's, my father's, Walter's, and a notary. They didn't just kick you out, Miss, Nolan said quietly. They signed you away. Legally, they stopped being your parents the moment they signed this. My hands trembled. I had been sitting on that porch in the dark, unaware that my mother was inside signing papers that would forever sever our legal bond. What does this mean for their claim? I asked. Ms. Nolan's expression shifted. It means they have no standing. Richard is not your father in the eyes of the law. She offered me 2 paths. Option 1, we negotiate a settlement, offer them up to $1 million to go away. Option 2, we proceed with the will, reading, and present the evidence. Walter anticipated this, she said. He left specific instructions for exactly this scenario. I thought about Walter's email, you owe yourself the truth. The next morning, I called Miss Nolan, no settlement. We're proceeding. The will reading was scheduled for Friday, March 14th at 2 p.m. The next few days were a blur of preparation. My best friend, Elena, who had joined the company 3 years earlier, helped me organize everything. She found 47 emails from Walter to me over the years, documenting his relationship with me and his reasons for distancing himself from Richard. In 2002, Richard had borrowed $80,000 from Walter and never repaid a cent, a broken promise that had fractured their relationship long before I arrived. Elena also pulled financial reports showing that under my leadership, the company's portfolio had grown significantly. On Thursday evening, I met with my therapist, Dr. Hayes. Remember why you're doing this, she said. You're not seeking revenge. You're closing a chapter. Friday came, and I was ready. I arrived at the office 15 minutes early, wearing a tailored navy suit. The conference room could seat 20 people, and by the time I entered, 14 others were already present. Miss Nolan sat at the head of the table. Representatives from 3 charities that Walter had supported for decades occupied several chairs. Senior staff members from the company sat together near the door. At 2:03 p.m., the elevator doors opened and my mother stepped out first, followed by my father, my sister, and their attorney. The show was about to begin. Cheryl Hayes entered the conference room like she owned it, dressed in a black dress and pearl necklace, projecting confidence. She surveyed the room with an expression of dignified grief. My father shuffled in behind her in a gray suit, his eyes darting away when they met mine. Melissa followed in a pink dress, looking out of place. Their attorney, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive briefcase, brought up the rear. Cheryl's gaze swept the room until it landed on me. "Ah," she said, her voice carrying, "you're here already." "Cheryl," I said, not moving. The single word made her pause. Miss Nolan rose from her seat and directed them to seats along the wall, not at the main table. Cheryl's jaw tightened, but she sat down, but not quietly. She introduced herself loudly to the charity representatives as Walter's sister-in-law, casting meaningful glances in my direction and hinting at unfortunate estrangement. I kept my eyes on my folder, giving her nothing. "I just wish Harold had seen through her the way we did," she said, her voice carrying. "A mother always knows." The words hung in the air. Several people shifted uncomfortably. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in 15 years. She hadn't changed at all, the same certainty, the same need to control the narrative. "Miss," Nolan cleared her throat. "It is 2:10. We will begin." She opened the will with careful precision. "This is the last will and testament of Walter Raymond Hayes." The room fell silent. Cheryl leaned forward, her pearl necklace catching the light. "Miss," Nolan read through the preliminary articles, then turned to the inventory of assets, 12 commercial properties, investment accounts, cash, totaling nearly $24 million. I heard Melissa whisper, "That's almost $24 million. Then came Article 5 regarding Richard James Hayes, brother of the deceased. Cheryl actually smiled. But Miss Nolan continued, "I make no provision in this will for my brother Richard James Hayes for the following reasons." She read Walter's words. First, in March of 2002, Richard borrowed $80. 000 from me, with a written promise to repay within 5 years. 23 years have passed. Not $1 has been returned. Richard's face went pale. Second, on July 15, 2010, Richard and his wife Cheryl voluntarily executed a legal document relinquishing all parental rights to their daughter, Amara Marie Hayes, transferring full guardianship to me. This document was properly witnessed and notarized. Cheryl shot to her feet. "What does that have to do with anything?" she demanded. Miss Nolan looked over her glasses and continued, "By legally terminating their parental relationship with Amara, Richard and Cheryl severed any claim they might have had to inherit through her. Amara is my legal heir. Richard is not her legal father." Richard stood up too. "This is ridiculous. I'm Walter's brother." Their attorney grabbed his arm, pulling him back down, but even he looked shaken. "Miss," Nolan produced the original document and laid it on the table. Cheryl stared at it like it was a live grenade. She didn't sit back down. "This is insane," she spat. "That paper doesn't mean anything." She pointed directly at me. "She did this. She manipulated Walter against his family." Melissa tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, sit down. I don't care who's watching," Cheryl snarled. "I want to know how this happened." I finally spoke, my voice calm and steady, just as Walter had taught me. "Cheryl, you made a choice 15 years ago. You put my belongings in garbage bags and left me on a porch in the dark. Then you went inside and signed a document giving me away." The room was dead silent. "That was your decision, not mine, not Walter's. Everything happening today is a consequence of what you chose that night." Cheryl's mouth opened, but no words came out. I looked her in the eye. "I don't hate you, but I also don't owe you anything. You made sure of that when you signed that paper." Their attorney was writing furiously, but I could see the defeat in his eyes. Miss Nolan continued, "If we may proceed, I haven't yet read Clause 7. Clause 7 was the one that would truly end their hopes." Miss Nolan turned the page and read Article 7, Designation of Sole Beneficiary. The room held its breath. "I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate to my legally adopted daughter, Amara Marie Hayes." The word adopted hung in the air like a thunderclap. Cheryl's face went white. "Adopted?" Richard's voice was hoarse. "Since when?" Miss Nolan answered, "Mr. Hayes formally adopted Amara Marie Hayes on September 12, 2012, when she was 15 years old. The adoption was finalized in King County Family Court as Mr. and Mrs. Hayes had already relinquished their parental rights. No additional consent was required." Melissa stared at me. "So, you're not even our relative anymore?" I met her eyes. "Not legally. Not since they signed me away." Miss Nolan continued, "Amara is not merely a beneficiary. She is my daughter in every way that matters, legally, practically, and emotionally. There is no one more deserving and no one I love more. My vision blurred. Uncle Walter had kept this secret, waiting for this moment. Cheryl was shaking her head. "This can't be legal," she whispered. Their attorney didn't answer. Miss Nolan reached into her folder and withdrew a sealed envelope. "There's one more item. Mr. Hayes left a personal letter for Amara." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Miss Nolan opened it and read, "Amara, if this letter is being read aloud, it means things happened exactly as I expected. Your biological family showed up looking for money they never earned from a man they never cared about." A soft sound escaped Cheryl's throat. Ms. Nolan continued, "You came to me as a wounded child, thrown away by people who should have protected you. But you didn't let that define you. I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. I'm leaving you my estate not because you need it, but because you deserve it. Don't let them back in unless you choose to. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. I love you, Amara. Forever your father, Walter." Tears were streaming down my face now. Cheryl made one last desperate play. "Amara, sweetheart," she said, her voice shifting to wounded motherhood. "I made mistakes. I admit that now. But we're still blood. Can't we at least talk about dividing the estate fairly?" I wiped my eyes and looked at her. "You gave up the right to call me sweetheart 15 years ago. I want to contest this will." Cheryl announced, "Victor, tell them we have grounds." Their attorney finally spoke, sounding defeated. "Mrs. Hayes, perhaps we should discuss our options privately." Miss Nolan interrupted. "Mr. Harris, perhaps you'd like to explain this to your clients." She turned her iPad around. On the screen was an email thread. She read aloud, "This is an email dated March 3rd, 2022, from Walter Hayes to Victor Harris. I am ending our professional relationship. Your advice that I include Richard in my estate plan is unacceptable. I will be engaging new counsel." She looked up at him. "You previously represented Walter Hayes. You were terminated for advocating against his wishes. You accepted this case without disclosing that conflict of interest." Harris's face went pale. He stood abruptly, gathering his briefcase. "I need to review these documents," he said, his voice stripped of polish. He walked toward the door and closed it behind him, abandoning his clients. Cheryl stood frozen, abandoned by her own attorney. Richard sat slumped in his chair, staring at the floor. Melissa was crying quietly. Cheryl turned to me one more time, her mask gone, replaced by desperation. "Amara, we're still a family, aren't we? Blood is blood." I stood up from the table. "Cheryl, you stopped being my family on July 15th, 2010. You signed the document yourself. I don't hate you. But you have no claim on me, not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that matters." Cheryl sat down heavily and didn't speak again. Ms. Nolan continued with the remaining articles, including charitable bequests totaling $1 million to 3 organizations. I addressed the room. "I intend to continue everything Walter built. The properties will be managed with integrity. The charitable commitments will be maintained. I will be establishing a new scholarship fund for children from difficult family situations who need someone to believe in them." As the meeting concluded, Cheryl approached me one final time. She looked diminished, smaller. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it and walked away. After that, I filed a formal complaint against their attorney, who was suspended from practicing law. My mother sent an email, apologizing but blaming her circumstances. I responded with a short, firm message. "I forgave you a long time ago. For myself, not for you. But I don't want a relationship. Please don't contact me again." Months later, I received a letter from Melissa. She wrote that she was sorry for not coming downstairs that night 15 years ago. "I failed you when you needed family most," she wrote. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you the truth." I replied with careful conditions for contact, and we now have occasional phone calls, tentative but real. A year after the will reading, I stood outside the first building Walter ever bought, looking at a bronze plaque dedicated to his memory. Meyer's property holdings had grown. The STEM scholarship had awarded its first grants. I had found peace. Not happiness, not triumph, but a deep, steady peace. If I look at my own story through a psychological lens, I see a concept called conditional self-worth, the belief that you're only valuable if certain people approve of you. I spent my first 13 years trapped in that belief. What saved me wasn't Walter's money. It was his unconditional acceptance. He saw me for who I was, not who I should have been. Here's what I want you to take from this story. You don't need anyone's permission to know your worth. And you have every right to set boundaries, even with family, even with parents, even with blood. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. Reconciliation is something you choose. They are two different things, and no one gets to decide which one you offer. Your story is yours to write. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to find your own worth after someone tried to take it away, I hope you know you're not alone. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, please like and subscribe to Winds of Thought, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when everything falls apart. Share your thoughts in the pinned comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.